In this video, we're going to cover Neo Geo Emulation on the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch. Alright, the time has come to update my Neo Geo setup guide. Not much has really changed on this one in the setup process, but it's nice to get everything brought up to the more current versions of Retroarch, so that way there just is less confusion on the setup process. But let's go ahead and dive in. So the first step to getting Neo Geo Emulation up and running on your Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch is to install the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch. You can do this in dev mode, retail mode, does not matter. Just follow along with one of these guides, get it installed, then you can jump back over to this guide to help get your core finalized. Link will be in the description below. The next thing you're going to need to do is source some Neo Geo games. There are numerous compilations out there as well as standalone purchases you can make of Neo Geo titles that include the games in MAME format, which is absolutely perfect because that's the format we need them in to run them on the Xbox Series X and S. Now, I'm going to throw it back to January me to show us one way of getting these games as well as how to rebuild them to work within Retroarch. Now, before I switch over to that, just a quick note, make sure that the version numbers just match the version of Final Burn Neo that you are using. While the steps that I'm about to re-show are still absolutely valid in what you're supposed to do, the version numbers aren't going to match up to today and now, so just do be aware of that. Alright, take it away, January me. You can head over to GOG and buy a few Neo Geo games, like Metal Slug here is one of them, King of Fighters. And I believe these releases are still using the older .emu releases, so they are just MAME ROMs inside of an installer. I don't own any of the GOG releases personally, but I've gathered that is what's happening from reviews and from forum posts on them. Alternatively, Humble Bundle also sells SNK games, and I myself got an SNK bundle about 4 or 5 years back as part of a Humble monthly bundle, and it included a ton of Neo Geo games. And thankfully, these are all in MAME format. So for example, I could download Art of Fighting 2 here, download Baseball Stars, download Blazing Star, Fatal Fury, and all of these other ones. I'll just skip ahead so they're all downloaded. And then just to give you a quick example, some of these games came in a rare format, so I could just extract them. And inside their folders, you should see a MAME zip and a Neo Geo zip. So the game Art of Fighting 2. So I'm just going to copy that to my desktop. And then I'm going to take this Neo Geo zip and copy it to my desktop as well, because this contains necessary BIOS files we need to run games. Unfortunately, there will be a couple of entries where they don't give you the MAME version. So for example, Baseball Stars 2 here does not have an actual MAME format game. It has actually been natively ported from what it looks like. So this is honestly what a lot of the Steam releases look like now. So unfortunately, I can't do anything with Baseball Stars 2 here. Now, the rest of these games came with installers, so I have to just go through and install them all manually. So I'm just going to skip ahead till they're all installed. And now that I got all of those games installed, I can begin going into their folders and finding their zip files. So for example, we could just copy this one, paste it. And then I also want to copy over the Neo Geo zip folder, but I'm not going to be able to since I already have one over here. So I'm just going to extract this to a Neo Geo folder real quick. And now I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to extract it to a folder named Neo Geo, and I'm going to tell it to go ahead and overwrite everything that it finds, just so that way we have a consolidated Neo Geo BIOS folder. But same thing with Fatal Fury Special, so there is the game ROM. Going to copy that over. Delete the Neo Geo folder. Copy this new Neo Geo folder over. And then I'm going to consolidate its BIOS files into the same Neo Geo folder. And I'm just going to do this for all of the games that I have here. So I'm going to skip ahead so you don't have to see me just toiling away at this for a while. And now that I have all of those game zip folders and the Neo Geo BIOSes pulled out, I can start getting these ready to run on Retroarch. So first thing I'm going to do is make a new folder here. And I'm just going to call it Neo Geo Games. And then I'm going to make another folder and call it Fix. We need to make sure that these games will run with our current emulator, so we need to make sure they get fixed. So I'm going to put all of these in the Fix folder. And then I'm just going to make another folder and just leave it alone. And I'm going to add my Neo Geo BIOS folder to the Fix folder as well, but I want to add one more file to it before we do, and that is the most up-to-date Universe BIOS file. So going to the Universe BIOS page, we could go to the download page and download version 4.0 for MVS/AES. So just download that. And after you get it downloaded, just get it extracted. So we don't need a what's new text, we don't need the readme text. But we do need this unibios.rom. So now we need to rename this. So unibios _4_0. And that is the format we need to use this on Retroarch. And now we can add that to our Neo Geo BIOS folder. So, if you want to make sure it's in the correct format, just match it to these other Universe BIOS ROMs that were in your Neo Geo games if you bought them through GOG or Humble Bundle. So you just got to name it similar. Anyways, now that I have all of the BIOS files I need, I'm going to select them all. And I'm going to send them to a compressed zip folder. And I want to name this zip folder Neo Geo, just like it was when we first pulled them all out. And now I'm going to add this Neo Geo zip to my Fix folder. And there we go. Now the next thing we need is CLR Main Pro. If you don't already have it, you can head over to CLR Main Pro. I'm going to have a link in the description. And you can click on the download tab. And we need to download a build for our computer, so I prefer using the zip folder myself, so I'm just going to tell this to download. And we also need an up-to-date DAT file for Neo Geo games, and I'm going to be using the Final Burn Neo core, so this is the DAT file I'm going to get. I'm going to have a link to this page for you, but basically there is a download button here in the middle. Right-click on this, save link as. And I already had one saved, so I'm just going to tell it to override it. But save the DAT file. And now that you have these files downloaded, we need to extract CLR Main Pro. So just going to extract that real quick. And then we're going to open the folder. We're going to open CM Pro 64. It's going to say that we need to do all this profiler stuff. That's fine. Just click OK. And now we're going to take that Final Burn Neo Geo DAT that we just downloaded. And we're just going to drag it right into this window here. It's going to ask you where you want to put it. Profiles is good, so just hit OK. And now we're going to right-click where it says Final Burn Neo and hit Load Profiles. And then it's going to say No Settings Found, so just click Default. Click OK to all if an error pops up. Close that folder real quick. And now for CLR Main Pro, we need to go into Settings. It's going to ask us for a ROM path, so we're going to add our Neo Geo Games folder. So, Neo Geo Games, so that's the empty one. And then it's going to ask for a sample path, so this is where we're just going to add that blank folder we made. That isn't important. And then we can close out of here. Next, we're going to go to Scanner. And we want non-merged sets. So, non-merged sets. And we're going to tell it to fix case, unneeded, name, size, and date. And under Advanced, we're going to tell it to not separate BIOS sets. This way, all of our Neo Geo games can run independently of each other, no matter where you put them. And then we're going to close out of that. And then down in the bottom right of that window, there's a Jump to Rebuilder section. So we're going to click on that. And now, same thing, non-merged sets. And then under Advanced, make sure that Separate BIOS Sets is unchecked. And once that's done, we can exit out there. And now we're going to select our Fix folder. So right there. So source is Fix, destination is Neo Geo Games, and we're going to click Rebuild. And this may take it a while to do, so just be patient and let it do its thing. And after it completes, you should see a rebuild time statistic thing show up. Just press OK on that. And we're going to have to do a little bit of cleanup here because when you go into your Neo Geo Games folder, you will see that it has made hundreds of files. And yeah, those aren't all games. Like, some of these just have the BIOS files in them. So they're not going to work. So what we need to do is open up our original fix folder. And we're going to match what we put in with what came out. So the first one that I put in is Art of Fighting 2. So anything before Art of Fighting 2 is not going to be a real game. So I could get rid of that. And then there's these sub-variants of Art of Fighting 2 that got made. I don't know if I have all of the required files to get these to work. I really don't care if I have all the required files. So I'm just going to make what I have on the left look like what I have on the right. So in the next one, Blaze Star. So anything under here is going to go away until we find Blaze Star. Fatal Fury. Fat Fur Sp. Garo. Ironclad. King of Fighters. Alright, and now I got my folders matched up. It looks like it skipped over my King of Fighters 2K second zip and this SS5 zip here, so I'm just going to call it good with what I got. Anyway, I'm going to close the fix folder. But now we're going to scan this folder and make sure the games are actually going to be usable. So if I click on this little button here that says Jump to Scanner, I'm going to tell it to do a new scan. And this will take a while, so just bear with it. And after the scan is complete, just press on OK. And then go over here in the bottom right and click on Have List. Tell it to save, and tell it to open. Now, if your games are going to work with Final Burn Neo, they should appear in your Have list. So I had 29 items in my folder. And I have 29 items of known Final Burn Neo Geo games plus BIOS. So there we go. My games are all set and ready to go. If your game doesn't appear on the Have list, it likely will not work. And in that case, you can click on the set information here. And find a game that you have. And you can see which files might be missing from the set. That way, if you're able to track that file down, you can add it to the game and it should be compatible. But once you have the set rebuilt to non-merged and you have scanned it and your games appear on the Have list, we're ready to transfer this over to our Xbox. So we can close out of CLR Main Pro. Now, if you've rebuilt your Neo Geo games as I've outlined beforehand, we no longer need this Neo Geo zip in our folder. All of our Neo Geo games have all of the BIOS files built into them, so they should just run automatically, no outside BIOS file folder required. Thank you, January Me. Saves me a ton of time not having to re-record something that is already valid. Again, just pay attention to those version numbers and this process is still totally valid. But once you have a final Neo Geo games folder with your rebuilt games, you just need to decide if you want to put those on a USB drive or on your Xbox's internal SSD. For my purposes, I'm going to put them on USB. So I'm just going to let it do its thing real quick. Alright, so those are now ready to go on my USB drive. And after you have your games placed, there is one more optional thing we can place on our USB drive or within the internal SSD for a moment to make our playlist creation for Neo Geo games a little bit cleaner. Since Neo Geo games are in MAME format, they have a very shorthand name, and when you do a manual scan for the playlist entry, it's going to keep these names and it might be hard to know which game is which. But if you use that same Final Burn Neo DAT file that you use to merge your games and get them prepared for this, you could place that onto your USB drive as well, so that way you can access it during your scan. That way it gives you the full names of your games. So I'm just going to grab my Final Burn Neo DAT file here and add it to my USB drive. There we go. But once I have my Neo Geo games placed and that DAT file placed, I can close out of everything on the computer side, take my USB drive out, put it back in my Xbox, and get booted into Retroarch. Now, over on my Xbox with that USB drive in place, I'm just going to get booted into Retroarch. And once Retroarch has finished loading up, we're free to begin loading up Neo Geo Content. But rather than show the load content option, I'm just going to go straight to import content and make a playlist. So head down to import content and do a manual scan. From here, we're going to choose a content directory. So if your games are on the internal SSD, you go down to S, Program Files, Windows Apps, Retroarch folder. Your made games folder, find your Neo Geo games folder, tell it to scan this directory. Or if you're like me and have games on USB, they will be located under E. Find your Neo Geo games folder, tell it to scan this directory. Now for system name, come in here and choose custom. And under custom system name, we are going to type out SNK space dash, no, that's underscore. Dash space. And then Neo. Geo. And once that's typed out, just as you see it here, press start. Now for our default core, we're going to scroll down to Arcade Final Burn Neo. Now make sure scan recursively is turned on if you have your game separated into subfolders. And now for the arcade DAT file, we're going to navigate to our USB drive and add in that Final Burn Neo DAT file that we placed earlier if you want your game names to appear correctly at least. And once these options are set, go ahead and start the scan. And once the scan is completed, we will have a new Neo Geo games playlist here on the left. And inside will be all of our Neo Geo games named accordingly to that DAT file, so that way they actually show up with their proper names and not just shorthand text nonsense. And then to start enjoying our Neo Geo games, all we need to do is go down to a game, press A, and tell it to run. And there we go! Neo Geo games up and running on our Xbox Series X and S. So for those of you looking to get a basic Neo Geo emulation setup going, that is the basic yet convoluted process on how to do so. Now, while the default Neo Geo experience is all good and fine, I like to use the Universe BIOS personally. That way we just have more customization options, choice of region, and different things like that, as well as access to easy cheats menus. So I'm going to show you how to get the Universe BIOS set up here real quick. So by going into our Retroarch quick menu, scroll down to Options. And now from here, go down to Neo Geo mode and make sure this is set to use BIOS specified in BIOS dip switch below. And then from here, head down to the dip switches tab and scroll down to BIOS. Now by default, it might be set to an MVS Asia Europe version, but you are able to change it between any version of BIOS that you happen to have in your Neo Geo zip when you made your non-merged ROM sets. But for my intents and purposes, I like to use the Universe BIOS, so I'm just going to scroll down until I find Universe BIOS 4.0. And with that option in place, I just need to back out again, close the content, and now when I rerun it, it's going to be loaded up into the Universe BIOS. So there we go, Neo Geo Universe BIOS version 4.0. And now with the Universe BIOS as our primary BIOS file, we can actually do a lot of cool options. So if you hold down X, A, B, and Start, it brings up an in-game menu. Now unfortunately, something has gone wrong with the controls in this version of Retroarch and Final Burn Neo, because normally you should be able to navigate this menu with the D-pad, but right now you have to use the face buttons. B moves it down, A moves it up, and then you have to use the D-pad to select the options. And unfortunately, this makes it so we can't fine-tune anything within the Universe BIOS currently until this gets fixed. But at least we can activate cheat codes. And you could use B and A to navigate them, and then you can press up on the D-pad to turn things on and off, and once you have things set the way that you would like, you could just press left on your D-pad to head out, and then you could just start playing the game. But again, the controls within the Universe BIOS are all screwed up at the moment, so it makes it really hard to actually navigate it, and because of that, I'm not going to be showing off how to change your system's type and all that in this version of the video. But as you can see, the cheats are working perfect. Have infinite ammo, infinite bombs. So still some good to be gotten out of the Universe BIOS, even in this interesting state it's in with this version of Retroarch. Now that being said, if you go into your options menu and go back down into the dip switch settings and go to the BIOS setting, there are a number of different BIOSes that you can choose between, depending on the Neo Geo ROM set that you have. You can try to switch between a number of different MVS systems or even some AES systems, You might not have all these BIOS files. Again, it really depends where you got your Neo Geo games, but you could try messing around with it in here, see what happens. Alright, let's go ahead and cover some of the advanced core options available within Final Burn Neo. So going back into our Retroarch menu, scroll back down to options, and our first option is to use 32-bit color depth when available. Turn that one on. Next, vertical mode. This lets you rotate the screen depending on your display, or if you have tape mode shooters or things like that. So on rotates at 90 degrees to the right, and alternate rotates at 90 degrees to the left, and then off puts it normal. Next, allow patched ROM sets. I'm not going to cover patched ROMs, but the option is on by default, and you can just leave it there. Analog speed, you could change this from 100% up or down depending on the sensitivity of your game and need. No crosshair with light gun device. We can't do light gun stuff anyway on Xbox currently, so this doesn't really matter. Next up, diagnostic input. So this lets you choose the button to go into your service menu. So as you can see in the background, I went into the service menu because this is set to hold start, just like my Retroarch quick menu. So I'm actually going to change this to hold select personally so they stop interfering with each other. Next, Neo Geo mode. Again, make sure this is set to use BIOS specified in BIOS dip switch below. I had mine set to use UniBIOS right now for testing purposes, but yeah, use BIOS specified in BIOS dip switch is the one you want. Next up, memory card mode. Some Neo Geo games supported memory cards, so you can change this to a shared memory card, which I don't really recommend because you'll run out of room real fast, so I say use per game. Next up, CPU clock frequency. So this is set to default speed. If you have Neo Geo games that have hardware-induced lag, you can increase the speed of the emulated CPU to try to overcome this. We're going to skip over the frame skip settings because bleh, and move right to audio settings. First up, sample rate. You can change between 44,100 or 48,000. 48,000 is better sound, so leave it there. Next, you can change your sample interpolation and FM interpolation modes. And lastly, you can enable a low-pass filter. Next up, dip switches. If you're using Final Burn Neo for arcade-based games, this can really change a lot depending on the game, but for Neo Geo, it's basically all the same. You've got auto-fire setting, coin shoots, communications, free play mode, stop mode, BIOS selection, memory cards, and new card types. The only real important settings in here, for me personally, are the BIOS and memory card. We want these to be writable. But everything else we don't really have to mess with. Like, you don't really need to turn on free play mode. We have infinite coins with our back buttons, so not the most useful of options, but they're here. But that's going to do it as far as core options are concerned. If there are games you want to have specific settings for, but not others, you can head up to Manage Core Options and save them as a game options file. That way, every time you load up that specific game, these are the options that will greet you. And they don't mess with the rest of your Neo Geo game library. But that's going to do it as far as Neo Geo Emulation is concerned for the Xbox Series X and S version of Retroarch. Initial setup on this one can be a bit convoluted thanks to having to rebuild your ROM set, but once you get it all set up and good to go, there's a good time to be had. As always, if you happen to have any questions about getting this set up, feel free to ask in the comments section below and I will do my best to try to help you out. But now if you could all do me a huge favor, please be sure to hit that like or dislike button, just depending on how much you like today's tutorial. And if you haven't done so already, hit that sub button so you can see when new videos like this go live on the channel. Updates for this stuff is constantly dropping and I do my best to try to keep it up to date, and this way you can all see that. If you'd like to further help support the channel, you can also check out that join button here on YouTube, or click on the Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. Little goes a long way to keeping this place up and running and bringing more content just like this to all of you. Just a big shout out to all of our current backers. Y'all are champions, you're our rock stars. Thank you so much for believing in what we do and keeping us going. But that's going to do it for this one, so until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, you all stay awesome and we will see you back next video.